So just to start with today, I want to start with this egg, and I want to actually show the connection between this egg and a very, very famous Victorian detective, Ron Iddles. Ron Iddles has had a career where he's investigated over 320 murders. He has a 99% conviction rate, and right now on Channel 7 he's narrating and featuring in the TV program called Homicide with Ron Iddles. So what's the connection between Ron and this egg? Well, to find that connection, we're going to go back a little bit into the background of Ron Iddles. Ron grew up on a dairy farm in Lockington, just out of Rochester, and his parents were part of the church that my mum and dad led back then. It was a Methodist church, and Ron's dad, Bill, had very severe rheumatoid arthritis, caused him incredible pain, and he asked my dad to come out and pray for him to be healed. And this was sort of new to my dad. Dad, I don't think, had really ever done anything quite like this before. Anyway, Dad went out, and somehow Dad had read up in James what you do to pray for someone. So he anointed him with oil, he put his hands on him, and he prayed over him for healing from this rheumatoid arthritis. Do you know what's amazing about what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. And so Dad left and went home, and Ron was left with the pain, and nothing had changed. 5 o'clock the next morning, the alarm goes off for him to get up, to go and get the cows in and to start milking in the dairy shed. He actually crawled to the dairy shed that morning. He was in so much pain. But you know what happened that morning? Not only did the cows get milked, but Bill Iddles, Ron's dad, got healed supernaturally from this crippling pain, from this crippling arthritis. And for the rest of our time when we lived in Rochester, Bill Iddles was so appreciative of this prayer that Dad had prayed over him, the healing that had taken place in his life, that when we as a family, they were going to build a new parsonage, or it was a house next to the church owned, they're going to build a new one, and for 12 months we had nowhere to live. So Bill Iddles suggested that we come and live on the dairy farm with him and his family in a house that he owned on the dairy farm, in his second house. So Ron Iddles, the detective, was my mate. We travelled on the bus together. He was a year older than me, but what we did was, after school on a dairy farm, we would collect birds' eggs. And we would collect all sorts of eggs. Now, it's a different world back then. I wouldn't do it now because I'm, but back then. And so this egg is an egg. It's from a water hen. And I can still remember going into the swamp and collecting this egg from a nest with Ron. And this egg collection involved little eggs, big eggs, but Ron came up with this idea. Because trying to get down from a tree with an egg in your mouth is problematic. You stick them in your pocket and things go horribly wrong. And so Ron, being smarter than me, he came up with this idea of creating a parachute. And we'd put the egg out of the nest, and we put this parachute in this little soft pouch, and then we'd let the parachute go, and it would go all the way down the ground, and we'd collect the egg. Now, this egg collection has travelled with me my whole life. For 52 years, since I was 12, these eggs, and I had probably about 60 of them, have been every home, every place we've left. I've protected them, I've looked after them, I've cared for them. But about 5 years ago, my little grandson, when he was about probably 3 or 4, was in my office. He climbed up on a table, he found my egg collection, and he systematically smashed every single egg but 2. And this is the only one of 2 remaining after all those years. And this morning, I'm going to take this egg and I'm going to smash it. I'm going to break it as a declaration that we as a church, as Red Gum, and as individuals, we are not going to spend our life protecting the shell, long after the life, the contents, what's really important is gone. We're not going to focus on programs and traditions and ways that we like doing things because it suits us. It's a declaration that's not just about us as a church, but as individuals. See, when I was 12, I didn't care about the content of this egg. I took a little pin and stuck a little hole in this end, and I stuck a hole in that end, and then I mixed up all the contents, and I blew it all out, so it's just the shell. I was only interested in the shell. But see, when I break this egg, it's going to be a declaration that we as individuals are going to be more passionate about what's inside the egg, what's inside the shell, than the outside, the external bits of it. See, shells do have a purpose, but they are temporary. They're not meant to last. So I'm just going to put this over here for a moment. I'll put that back in there. My body's a shell. It's temporary. Like, our bodies are just a tent. It's like we're only here for the long weekend. And if you were to look at photos of me when I was 24 compared to being 64, I don't look the same, and neither do you. So don't laugh at me. But I don't look the same. But if you were to ask Coral, would she be rather married to the 24-year-old Lex or the 64-year-old Lex? I know what her answer would be. And because what we allow to happen on the inside, the changes inside, they become generationally passed on in really wonderful and powerful ways. And the opposite is also true. Now, this egg was only designed to live and use and be functional for about 22 days. That's the incubation period of a water hen, not 52 years. And this thing about the egg is that if I had not destroyed the content, this egg would have gone on and created generations of water hens that would have continued on and on and on. But I didn't care about the content. I didn't care about what was the DNA inside that egg, the potential, the beauty. I don't know if you know what a water hen looks like, but they're those sort of purpley bluebirds that sort of run along the grass near swamps and lakes and stuff, and got like a red beak and red legs. They're really pretty. They're much nicer than just the shell of an egg. And God sees your potential. He sees beyond the external, and he sees what's inside you. I love how brilliantly Jesus related to women. Two of his closest friends were two sisters, Mary and Martha, and their brother Lazarus. And they lived just 5 k's out of Jerusalem in a little town called Bethany. And there was a day when Jesus turned up, and he's got all the entourage with him. He's got all the tribe with him. He's got all these 12 team members with him. And he rocks up unannounced at their home, and Martha talks them into coming in for a meal. It's just beautiful. I love the way that hospitality is extended, and Jesus comes into their home for this meal. And we find the story in Luke chapter 10, and I'm going to pick it up in verse 38. And in verse 38, we find Martha inviting Jesus to come in. But then in verse 40, just 2 verses later, we find her accusing Jesus of not caring about her. We find Martha having a go at Jesus. So what happened in just 2 verses? Martha has lost sight of what's in the egg, and she's become more interested in the shell. And it's so easy for us to invite Jesus into our life and then so quickly turn on God when we don't think that he's doing what we want him to do, and we tell him what we want him to do, and we become angry and bitter towards God. So in this story, we have 2 sisters. One's in the kitchen and one's in the lounge room, hanging out with Jesus and the boys and listening and learning about life and how God's kingdom works on earth. And then Luke he gets to verse 40 and he tells us this. He says, "But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made." They hadn't ordered pizza. And Luke tells us that there were things to be done. He doesn't gloss over it. He doesn't pretend there wasn't a whole lot of people to be fed. But he says that she's been distracted even though it's a good thing. And then Luke tells us that Martha gets really ticked off with Jesus. And she comes to him and she unloads all this emotional stuff that she's feeling inside. And this is what she begins to say to Jesus. "Don't you care? Don't you care?" See, that's not a question, it's a statement. She says, "Don't you care that I've been left with all the work? Don't you care that my sister has left me by myself? Jesus, tell her to come and help me." She's expecting Jesus to back her up. She knows Jesus cares. She knows how he loves her. The response that Jesus comes back with, I don't think she was ready for. Because this is what Jesus says. "Martha, Martha," I hope you can feel the tenderness in that. "Martha, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things." See, Jesus was showing her that this moment had nothing to do with getting a meal ready, but about Martha's values, about her priorities, the timing that she thought was important, about really what Martha measured as success, what success for Martha looked like that day. And then Jesus continues, "But only one thing, Martha, is needed. Mary has chosen what is better." She's found out what's in the shell, what's in the egg, and it will not be taken away from her. Jesus that day redefined success for Mary. Mary didn't go to Peter and say, "Peter, can you get the barbie going? Can you find some wood for us?" She didn't wait to go to Thomas and say, "Thomas, can you peel the onions?" Because I doubt Thomas would have wanted to peel onions. Why didn't she do that? Cultural expectations. All the pressure she felt on the inside was this culturally expected thing, how people would perceive her, how she thought people would look at her if she didn't do what she was doing. You've heard the old joke, "Why the chicken cross the road?" Well, back then in Jesus' day, they had a variation of that. And this is it. Why did the woman cross the road? And the answer, that's not important. What was she doing out of the kitchen? Now, that's not my theology, right? That's from 2,000 years ago. We've changed. In fact, Cora and I share a lot of the kitchen work. I cook and she cleans up my mess. But she expected Mary to help her because being a good host was how she saw success that day. She didn't see herself as being a good student, as learning from Jesus. She saw success just simply as being a good host. What an opportunity in the history of humanity to have the Son of God in your home, sharing his heart with all those that would hear. And she sees success as being in a kitchen. And Jesus says to Mary, "What you've chosen is better, Mary, and it will not be taken away from you." When we started Open House Church in Sydney, in New South Wales, it grew really quickly. And as a result of that, I got asked to be part of a district team, a small team that looked after 1/3 of all Sydney, 55 ACC churches in that area. But when they asked me to join this team, other than the leader of the team, nobody knew who I was. I'm just this little white boy from the bush. Nobody knew who I was. So they called me in for a meeting to find out more about me. And I sat down with these guys and I said to them, "You've invited me on this team for all the wrong reasons. I'm only here because our church has grown really quickly in numbers. If it had taken 3 years to get to these same numbers, you wouldn't have asked me to be on this team. That's a problem. the Australian Christian churches are in love with fast growth, and that's a problem. Anyway, they still accepted me onto the team, and so for 7 or 8 years before we came back to Bairnsdale, I shared on that team. I helped carry the load and to care for churches in that part of Sydney, and it was such a privilege, and I learnt so much through that time. But then our church started to lose numbers. We lost good people, and it hurt, and it was painful, and our numbers went really down. And why that happened is not important in this story today. What is important that I learned something. I learned that when momentum is working for you, it makes you look a whole lot better than you really are. And when it's working against you, it makes you look a whole lot worse than you really are. But what I learned is more important than that. It's that how I look, what I look like on the outside, what's going on in the life of our church, that is not how God measures success. And so I found that I had this opportunity to redefine in my life what success would look like. And to be honest, in my life, I've used numbers to try to impress people. I've exaggerated. I'm not saying I lied, but I've told a story that's only half the story because I've painted a picture of all the good things that I want to impress people with, and I've left out the other stuff. And that's not how I want to live life. But just recently, I was telling someone about the farm that we used to own, and I said, we lived on this 1,000-acre farm we had out Woodglen. And on the way home, Coral says to me, why did you say there was 1,000 acres? Why didn't you just say we had a farm? Now, I could have given a logical answer, but deep down, I wasn't just trying to paint a story. I was trying to impress someone by the size of the farm that we owned, because our world values big. Our world values more money, more toys, bigger opportunities, bigger responsibilities. We live in a world that sees success through that lens. But Open House Church helped to change me. It helped me drop my love affair with the shell, with the outside of the egg, and to value people and not numbers. And people's lives are messy. They're inconvenient. Now, I'm just going to put a little photo up on the screen right now of two people that became very precious to me in my life, and they still are. And it's Dave and Kylie. And Dave's a big boy. There was a day when Dave lost it, and it took 8 cops to control him, to get him down to the ground. And when I first met Dave, he was a brand new Christian. A friend of ours introduced him to Jesus in a shopping centre. And he rang me up and asked me to come and meet with Dave, and I did. And Dave came to Open House Church for the first time, and he brought his partner, Kylie. And Kylie was anti-church. She was anti-God. She was anti-me. I was the enemy when she walked in. I'm leading this thing. And I can remember walking up to her afterwards and introducing myself. She didn't want to talk to me. She didn't want to know me. She wanted to be just out of there. She'd done it for Dave and she was gone. But over time, Kylie and Dave became part of Open House, and so did their extended family. And we became really good friends, valuable people in my life. Now, the person that introduced me to David and Kylie had started introducing me to more people that he wanted to send to Open House Church, but then he stopped. And the reason he stopped was how he valued the success of what I was doing. See, David and Kylie have been living together for about 16, 17 years. They have 2 children that don't live with them, and they've never been married. And this Christian, he, from the beginning, told them that they couldn't keep sleeping together, and that they had to get married. And that was his way of measuring success in their life. But see, I was focused on their relationship with Jesus. I did actually offer to marry you guys because I know they're watching. I rang them up yesterday and asked permission to share their story. And I've offered to marry you. That offer's still open. But see, their growth as Christians was about what was on the inside. Their commitment to each other's for life. The marriage bit has never been a big issue to them, but it was to this other Christian. And he judged all the success of their walk with God by this external shell and not what was going on in their lives. In fact, when I spoke to them yesterday, Robin, Dave's mum, she jumped on the phone and she said, Lex, I want to tell you, my son is the best son I could ever want. He is so soft. He so supports Kylie. I'm so proud of him now. His life has been a struggle at times, really big struggle, but he's changed. And Kylie's like a daughter to me. See, people's lives are messy. They're inconvenient. And what happens, we don't always see it. It's not about numbers. Jesus came to make a difference in 12 men's lives, and one of them was a failure. But he did it to ultimately change a world, but he began with individuals. And when we started Red Gum, I made a decision that even though preparation time for being able to talk to you is really important, I'm slow at it, and I really hate the pressure of not being ready by Sunday morning. I made a decision that people would be more important, that I would make myself available, that if someone was in need, then God would have to help me with the rest of this. And so I answer my phone. I don't take Mondays off. I'm contactable basically at any time, and I monitor that. I'm aware of my energy levels. I'm aware of my capacities, but when people need help, they need help. And when I woke up during the night last night, for some reason my phone was on silent. I looked at my phone, and there was a message from someone from about half an hour earlier. So at 2:30 this morning, I started messaging back. I started praying for them, and they started messaging back. For the next 2 hours till 4:30 this morning, I'm reaching out to help someone, because that is when they needed help. They didn't need help between 9 to 5 and business hours. And see, when you don't care about numbers, when you care about people, you allow God to bump into what isn't convenient, to break into your world, to give you a heart of compassion and ability to help others. And my story is your story. That's what God's called you and I to do together. That's what we're going to do. See, the Bible is a book about stories about people's lives. It's not a book about rules. It's not a book about numbers, even though there is a book called Numbers, but about people's lives that are messy. And one of the messy lives in the New Testament is Peter. Peter was a handful for Jesus. Peter left his family business to follow Jesus. He was a fan of Jesus. He loved seeing the miracles. He loved being on the road with Jesus. He could see how Jesus could change and set Israel free from Roman occupation. He measured success by everything his culture measured success by. But everything changed the day that Jesus started talking about going to a cross, to die, to rise again from the dead, to being killed by these Roman soldiers that Jesus could have set Israel free from. He had the power to do that. And it really, really upset Peter to the point where Peter, he has a go at Jesus. And Matthew records it, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. That's to say, That's to tell Jesus off. And he says, never, Lord. He said, this will never happen. You're never going to hang on a cross. I will never let that happen. Because in Peter's definition of success, there was no place for a cross. I've had Christians tell me how God's in something because it's going so well for them. I've had Christians, when everything's going wrong, tell me that God's abandoned them, that God's left them, and they start to then tell Jesus what he should be doing. There was a storm that Peter was part of in a boat on Lake Galilee one night, and seasoned fishermen were convinced they were going to drown, they were going to die. Do you know what? They'd got into that boat because Jesus had called them to go the other side. They were in the bullseye of God's will, and everything had gone wrong. You can't measure by success, by how well things are going or how bad things are going. There's a different way to do this. And Peter, his view of success, it clashed with what Jesus saw, his purpose in life. And Peter tried to control God. And he told him what to do. And that's the moment that Jesus took the gloves off. This is the moment when Jesus said something so harsh, it's almost shocking. And Jesus, because Jesus was getting to why, what was behind what Peter was doing. And Jesus said this, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, that's not very nice. I've never said that to Coral when she's disagreed with me, ever. There are some things that Jesus said you just don't say to other people when they're not agreeing with you. But see, Jesus was getting to the heart behind that, and he goes on and he says, "You are a stumbling block to me, Peter. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Peter, you're valuing the shell. You're looking at the shell. You're missing the contents of what's in the egg. And in the next breath, Jesus went on to say something that it's something that clashes today with our definition of success in our world. And he says, anyone who would come after me must deny himself. That Greek word deny, it's a really strong word. And it means to contradict, to reject, to move away from, to separate, to disown our love affair with shells that at best are temporary, and to pursue what's in the egg. And Jesus continues and he says, "And take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Peter heard that and just dismissed it. He so quickly forgot about it. He just got back on with life. He went back to how he valued success. And the night that Jesus is arrested in the garden, Jesus is being taken away, and Peter's response against his dreams being squashed, against his future being stolen, he grabs his sword out and he has a go at the high priest's servant, and he's not a good shot, but he whacks off the bloke's ear, because that is him trying to protect the success that's disappearing in front of his eyes. The dream is being gone. And so that night gets worse for Peter. Not only does that go wrong, but Peter ends up, instead of denying himself, he denies that he even knows Jesus, that he's never heard of him. He swears at someone who even thinks that Jesus and Peter knew each other. But see, when Jesus first called Peter, he saw the potential of what was within him. He didn't look at the shell. And that's how God comes to us in your life, in your world. He sees what's within you. He sees the potential within the shell. Let's just jump forward many years later in Peter's life as I finish. I want to read you Peter's words that Peter wrote to some early Christians in the early church. He wrote this: "Make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control," well, Peter had never known self-control, but now he does. "And to self-control, perseverance, and to perseverance, godliness." These are layers, layer upon layer. And to godliness, brotherly kindness. And to brotherly kindness, and this is at the top. This is what everything else sits on. This sits on top of everything else. Love. And then Peter says, "For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive." What's the opposite of ineffective and unproductive? Success. That's a recipe. That's God's recipe for success. And Peter has found, all these years later, what's in the egg. Do you know how God measures success? By how well we love. When we started Red Gum, we began with a commitment that no matter how well Dave leads worship, no matter how well that Joel plays drums for the first time, no matter how well we do anything, if you walk in the doors, or even if you're watching this and you don't feel loved, we've failed. Doesn't matter what else we do. And so this morning, I'm going to smash this egg. In fact, Brooklyn, do you want to come and help me? Because I've had this egg for 52 years. And it's actually really hard for me because I have come over here. Can you? You are a monkey, yes. Right. I'm going to put this.
And I'm only this monkey.
Yes, now. Just not yet, right? But the reason for this is that emotionally I'm connected to this egg. Emotionally, I protected it. Emotionally, I don't want to break it. And for some of you, you're thinking, it's okay, Lex, we've got the idea. You don't have to break it now. We've sort of got the message. Well, I can't go through this message without this being a declaration. So, Brooklyn, can you help me? Because this is actually a bit hard for me. So, you want to do this, do you?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm very sure. I like smashing stuff.
Okay, so there you go. You can smash it, yep. Just gently, whoa. Can you pick the egg up again? This is a tough egg, right? 52 years of toughness. Now, just here, we'll do it together, right? Just gently, just gently. Right. Kids, who would work with them? Now, here, I'm going to just, here, just smash it, just hit. Yep. Okay, thank you. It's funny, you plan all these things, but it is what it is. So thank you, Brooklyn. I'm going to pray. Lord, this egg today, we've smashed it as a declaration that we as a church will not focus on the external, but we'll focus on what really matters, how you measure success. We as individuals, it's a declaration for us that in our life, we are going to focus on what's on the inside, the important things, the things that you value, how you value people, how you value the changes in our lives, that we don't live broken, that we are whole and healed. I thank you hung on a cross because that was success. The world looked at it and thought it was a failure, but it was your triumph. It was when you overcame everything so we could be free. And I thank you, Jesus, that you measure our world and you measure our lives and you measure success very differently than everything else around us. I thank you for that.